Let's talk about Donald Trump with Matthew Bryson, my next guest. He's a former White House official who was with the Obama administration and joins us now to talk about those Trump tariffs. Are they going to carry on or aren't they? A very good morning to you, Matthew.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for chirpy. You're sounding very chirpy, probably more chirpy than most people in the White House right now. Although I have a funny feeling a lot of people working in Trump's White House would be quite happy to get rid of these Liberation Day tariffs. We had that big announcement, it was last month, feels like a lifetime ago, these huge tariffs on pretty much any country, and not even all countries that had a balance of trade deficit with the US. Often it was countries that didn't have a balance of trade deficit, like we barely do. And basically massive tariffs. It went up to 145%, which China's talked about 50% with the EU, big tariffs on Canada and Mexico. It's all changed, some suspended, some not. Some deals to ratchet them down with Keir Starmer with the UK. Not even sure those are coming to force yet. No one knows where they stand. No one knows what the situation is. Businesses are ground to a halt. Massive impact on the economy, massive impact on prices for a lot of people as well. Then yesterday, a trade court in New York basically ruled that actually he can't go ahead with these tariffs. What was that ruling and why is it so significant?
It's really amazing because tariffs are, as you were just describing, the center of President Trump's international economic policy. And he has said for years, I love tariffs. So what happened was that this trade court, an obscure court, three-person panel, so three judges, one appointed by, the Reagan administration, one in the Obama administration, and one under Trump.
Yeah.
They ruled that the Congress delegated authority to a U.S. president to impose tariffs only under emergency situations, essentially. And this is not an emergency situation. Therefore, Trump does not have the authority to impose tariffs. Rather, only the Congress does.
Yeah, basically, it's same as he's actually said, for instance, used these emergency powers to, for instance, deport people and close the border on the basis there's an invasion, warlike invasion of the country, using the executive order powers there. And a lot of people are saying he's just, he's taking too many powers that the president under the Constitution doesn't really have. Look, we know that the White House is going to challenge this. They're going to appeal this. It could, very quickly end up in the Supreme Court. How do you think the Supreme Court would rule on this?
Yeah, so the Trump administration already appealed this injunction, and then it's going to appeal the case as well. And it will, I think it'll certainly go to the Supreme Court. How the Supreme Court will rule, I personally, it's just a guess, right? But I believe the Supreme Court will likely rule against the administration because it seems pretty straightforward that the United States is not facing an economic emergency in trade.
Well, that's the key thing, isn't it? His view on tariffs, and again, out of kilter with lots of Democrats, but also with a huge number of Republicans in Congress and Republican voters in terms of who've been very much afraid of free trade. Tariffs are taxes. I don't know how anyone can say, as Donald Trump did, tariffs, my favourite word in the English language. It shouldn't be, mate. We know that ultimately they get passed on to the consumer. Now, he did have this argument that he wanted to base. There were two or three different arguments. One was he was just going to, force all these companies to, to come back onshore. Don't make your products over in India or China. Make them here or Canada or Mexico. Make them here in the United States, and then we'll get the jobs back. That's great, apart from the fact that, of course, labour costs in the United States compared to somewhere like India are so ridiculously different. That's just not tenable, and people need to be sure those tariffs are going to stay for 20 years to make it worthwhile to build the factory. We've had a bit of onshoring, but not that much. Also, he'd bring in a load of money, billions and billions, towards paying for things in America by imposing those tariffs. And the other was that he was going to use it as leverage to get to zero tariffs with other countries. Now, all three of those things might be good for America, but all three are, as been pointing out, mutually exclusive. You can have one, but you can't have the other two. You simply can't do it. He hasn't achieved any of them, has he?
No, not yet. It's still very early. He made a point earlier this week that he's not looking for a deal with the European Union. He's not negotiating. He just wants to impose tariffs just for the sake of it. And as you said, Julia, you can't achieve all these objectives at the same time. If the goal is to raise revenue, that means more money out of the pockets of American consumers into the federal government. But if that's the goal, then if you bring back manufacturing into the United States, then you lose that ability to use a tariff. So I think that at the end of the day, what you said at the very beginning is right on target, which is that there are many people in his administration and in his White House who don't like this unorthodox economic policy. Yeah. And in fact, at the end of the day, he's creating such a mess, especially in the U.S. bond markets. aka like Liz Truss did, that he may welcome at the end of the day that the court will free him from this albatross that he placed around his own neck.
And again, we know one of the big critics of this was Elon Musk, of course, as a car manufacturer, who worked, running DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. We'll come on to him in just a moment. But in terms of where, how this ends, will it take weeks? Will it take months? I mean, if he can get the injunction overturned quickly, if the appeal process and up to the Supreme Court, could that be years, or could it be done, by the end of June?
I don't think there's any way first of all, the Supreme Court will not hear the case before the end of June. So it will, if it goes that high, it will be months. If the lower court overturns the injunction, then we're kind of back to that abnormal normality. But I think it'll take a long time and we'll be in limbo for a while. And, what happens often with any presidential administration, especially the Trump one, is, issues are really hot for a while and then they go away.
And again, I'm thinking, when the story was on the radio this morning, I woke up and I'm like, God, wait a minute, what was the latest deal that we did? Did those tariffs even come into force in terms of the lower levels? I mean, there's so much confusion on any given day. What are the tariffs in any individual country? And again, if you don't work in export and import, and if you don't make cars or make steel, for instance, you're not really going to know or think it affects you. But of course, there will be and has already been a worldwide impact, because this disruption to trade, like when there's a pandemic in China and they close down a load of factories, there is a massive impact on world trade when two of the biggest economies in the world go to war economically.
Yeah, there's also a massive impact simply on U.S. investors and companies, because if you run a company, you don't know, do I ramp up production overseas in my factory, or do I have to begin planning a multi-year move of our
car manufacturers here in the UK literally cutting all exports to the United States until they know what's going on.
That's the rational decision. What else can you possibly do? I mean, it's crazy, the situation for U.S. auto manufacturers, where the U.S. auto manufacturing industry in North America is fully integrated with parts that are produced in Mexico and in Canada. And the U.S. has free trade agreements with both countries, or a free trade agreement. So everything that's happening will disrupt the manufacturing of the U.S. auto industry and is against the treaty.
Yeah, it is quite bizarre, isn't it? As I said, Elon Musk was one of the critics of that, not just privately, but publicly. But he's going to be leaving the White House. And we always knew his job was temporary, running the Department for Government Efficiency, DOGE. We also knew that, let's face it, that Donald Trump doesn't take criticism from anybody. You have to sort of he's almost like a child. You have to gently sort of coax round to your point of view. It's where we are with Ukraine and Vladimir Putin. But we also know, and I said this before when he was appointed, I said he won't last long, even if, whatever the term is, he was going to be in office. He won't last long, simply because he gets headlines more than Donald Trump on occasion, and the Donald doesn't like that.
That's true. I think you and I both made that point together. I'm sure you've made it many other times. It's true. Trump doesn't like that criticism. And there were workarounds. He was a so-called special government employee, Musk, and so he was supposed to have to leave after, I think it's 130 days. Yeah. But there would have been workarounds. So I think, part of it is that part of the reason he's leaving is that, maybe a clash with a larger-than-life personality, Donald Trump. But I think he really is against these tariffs. He doesn't believe that's the way to drive an economy, and he sees his influence is waning. Because he can't have an impact on that debate. And DOGE really hasn't found many cuts in the U.S. government.
Haven't they? I mean, they were early on, there was a lot of talk, but a lot of those people kind of were reinstated. But, I mean, have they not? When you say you haven't found many cuts, what numbers are we talking?
Well, about 174 billion, and he had said we were going to find like 2 trillion. And many of those, it's now appearing, you can't really trace back through accounting methods whether they're real. Some have been double counted. So I think he's really disappointed and frustrated. And I mean, Tesla is in big trouble without him at the helm, and with him in politics the way it is, as people stop buying his cars. Yeah,
I mean, there is that, isn't there? Also, the small matter of trying to get a rocket to Mars. And I imagine running Tesla and running SpaceX are each on their own a full-time job. And so adding 2 full-time jobs and then that job in the White House. I have to say, I mean, do not support anything that he was doing at DOGE. There was a lot of, bull in a china shop stuff, but that your government, I mean, ours is pretty darn bad, but your government is outrageously bloated and you are in trillions of debt. The Americans are still funding that debt, repayments on a huge scale. Something had to be done, didn't it?
Absolutely, and you'd be hard pressed to find any serious U.S. federal government employee who would disagree. I mean, and it's the biggest organization in history on the planet, so of course there's
bigger than the NHS in the UK.
It is bigger. I mean, the whole federal government.
Wait a minute. How many pride flags have you got, though? That's how we measure these things now.
I don't know. Good question, but it's enormous. But the problem was the way DOJ went about it with these, in some cases, maybe illegal firings of people who had labor protections, and a haphazard approach that didn't think about what's the mission of the organization you're going to cut and how can you perform the mission more efficiently.
Okay.
That wasn't
Very interesting. Matthew Bryce, always good to talk to you, former White House official under the Obama administration, certainly no sympathetic supporter of Donald Trump. But Philip Ingram, I still think there are stuff that, certainly Elon Musk has tried to do. And the fact that you can't fire people in government, that's a bit of a giveaway, isn't it?
Very much so. That's
why it keeps growing and growing and growing, but getting less useful stuff done.
Yeah, very much so. I, many years ago, helped reform the army in the UK, and we cut lots of capability, but we cut lots of capability because we found that all it was doing was feeding itself with things. My self-licking eye, Solly.
And we took go back and listen to that. It's very complicated.
We took it away, and it actually made everything much more efficient. But we saved billions.
Every organisation, whether private or public, but particularly in the public sector, has a whole bunch of people, and indeed a whole departments, who actively it's not they don't get anything done. They actively stop everyone else from getting stuff done. You know who you are.